Think about the last time something genuinely good happened to you. A sunset that stopped you in your tracks. A meal so perfect it made you close your eyes. A conversation that left you feeling more alive than you did when it started. Now here's the question. Was your first instinct to share it or to hold it? Because how you answer that question might reveal more about your psychology than you realize. There is a quiet, growing population of people who move through the world of social media like guests who never quite move in. They have accounts, they have profiles, they might scroll for hours. But post? Never. Not once, or almost never. And the world has a lot of opinions about what that means. That they're reclusive, or suspicious, or living some kind of tragically unexamined life. But here's what the psychology actually shows. These people aren't absent from their lives. They're more present in them than most. Today I want to take you inside the psychology of people who never post on social media. Not to defend them, not to judge the people who do post, but to genuinely understand what's happening at the psychological level. Because it's fascinating, it's layered, and it turns out to be one of the most interesting windows into how different minds relate to identity, experience, and what it means to be real. Let me start with something that I think most people get wrong about non-posters. They assume the behavior comes from a lack of confidence, a lack of things to say, a lack of social desire. And that assumption is almost always backwards. Because the psychological research on people who prefer private experience over public sharing consistently reveals the same surprising pattern. These are not people who have less. They're people who protect more. Here's a concept that helps explain this. In psychology, there's something called the peak end rule, developed by Nobel Prize-winning researcher Daniel Kahneman. It describes how we remember experiences, primarily by their peak intensity and how they ended, rather than their totality. And there's a fascinating corollary to this that researchers have been documenting more recently. The act of photographing or posting an experience can actually reduce how deeply it's encoded in memory. When you outsource the memory to a device or a platform, your brain partially disengages from the work of remembering it yourself. Non-posters, knowingly or not, are protecting the peak. They're keeping the experience whole. And there's something else happening at the identity level that's even more interesting. Social media is fundamentally a medium of identity performance. Every post is a micro-decision about self-presentation. What version of yourself to project, what narrative you're building, how you want to be perceived. Psychologists call this impression management, and it's a completely normal human behavior. The thing is, it requires a kind of ongoing negotiation between your private self and your public image. And for certain people, particularly those who score high in what researchers call identity certainty, that negotiation feels not just unnecessary, but faintly absurd. They know who they are. They've never needed an audience to confirm it. The idea of constructing a public version of themselves to broadcast into a void is not frightening. It's just genuinely puzzling to them. Think about what that means. We often assume that the people most comfortable in social situations are the most active on social media. But research on narcissism and social media use tells a different story. People who post most frequently and most strategically often score higher on measures of social anxiety, need for approval, and what psychologists call contingent self-esteem, a sense of self-worth that rises and falls with external feedback. The person who never posts may not be the insecure one. They may be the one whose self-esteem is least contingent on what other people think. Now I want to bring you to something I find genuinely beautiful about this psychology. There's a concept in philosophy, and in certain branches of psychology, called the distinction between experience and narration. An experience is what actually happens to you, the raw, unmediated reality of a moment. Narration is the story you build around that experience to communicate it to others. And here's the thing. Narrating an experience changes it. The moment you start crafting the story, selecting the right words, finding the frame, deciding what to leave in and what to cut, you're no longer inside the experience. You're outside it, looking at it, shaping it into something digestible for an audience. For people who never post, there is often a deep, instinctive preference for the experience over the narration of it. Not because they can't articulate their lives, but because they feel, sometimes quite acutely, the cost of narration. The slight diminishment, the distance it creates between the self and the moment. Virginia Woolf, who never had to contend with Instagram but understood this psychology profoundly, wrote about the difference between living a moment and turning it into a story. The way the telling always takes something from the living. Non-posters understand this viscerally, even if they've never read a word of Woolf. There's also a privacy dimension here that goes deeper than most people realize. We tend to think of privacy as something you protect because you have something to hide. But psychological research on privacy motivation tells a much richer story. For many people, privacy is not about hiding. It's about self-determination, the right to control your own narrative, to decide what gets shared and what stays yours. Westin's foundational privacy theory describes 4 states of privacy that people seek: solitude, intimacy, anonymity, and reserve. Non-posters are often people with a very high need for reserve, the ability to hold information back not because it's shameful, but because it's theirs. Because keeping something just for yourself is its own kind of meaning-making. And here's something the algorithm-driven, engagement-optimized world tends to flatten. Not everything that matters needs to be witnessed to matter. There is a long and serious philosophical tradition, from the Stoics to the existentialists to the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, that locates the deepest experience not in being seen, but in seeing, not in being known, but in knowing. The non-poster is often living inside a framework of meaning that doesn't require an audience, and in a cultural moment where visibility has become so tangled up with worth, that framework is genuinely countercultural. I want to end with something that I think is worth sitting with. We live in a time when the pressure to share has become almost indistinguishable from the pressure to exist publicly. To matter, you must be seen. To have lived, you must have documented. And the person who quietly experiences their life without broadcasting it can feel like a failure of modern engagement, to others, and sometimes even to themselves. But what if we got that exactly backwards? What if the person who can have a perfect sunset and choose not to post it, who can let that moment live only in their own memory and in the memories of whoever was standing beside them, has actually mastered something that the rest of us are still figuring out? The capacity to be fully somewhere. The ability to let things be real without making them public. The confidence to know that a life doesn't require documentation to have been worth living. If you're a non-poster, this isn't a character flaw you need to explain or defend. It's a specific, psychologically grounded relationship with experience, identity, and meaning. And it's more sophisticated than the assumptions people make about it. And if you do post, I'd encourage you to notice the moments where you hesitate, because that hesitation, the thing that feels too real, too private, too genuinely yours to hand over to a feed, that's the same instinct. We all have it. Some people just trust it more than others. Drop a comment and tell me, what's one experience you've had that you chose not to share, and why? I'd genuinely love to read them. And if you want to keep going deeper into the psychology of how different minds relate to the world, there's a lot more ahead. See you in the next one.